And so as we continued working our way, finishing up with paper 2, we turned to paper 3. By the way, I'm going a little bit over in my study, so if you guys don't mind, just give me another, say, 5 or 10 minutes to do the overview of paper 3. Exploring the Shema, paper 3 of 3, who or what is the Holy Spirit. So it's a 3-part paper on purpose, dealing with the tripart nature of our God. And in this particular part of my commentary, we had more topics. Number 1 topic, introduction, my BLUF, my bottom line up front on who and what I believe the Holy Spirit is. Number 2, who or what is the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God versus Spirit of Christ versus the Holy Spirit. Section 3, who or what is the Holy Spirit, who or what Spirit is indwelling believers. Section number 4, who or what is the Holy Spirit, the Filioque debate, Eastern Orthodoxy, the Latter-day Saints, and social Trinitarian thoughts. Remember, each one of these links in my commentary is hot linked. So if you click on any link, if you're using the website or your mobile device, if you click on it, it'll jump right down into that particular topic. Segment 5, who or what is the Holy Spirit, Rabbinic Jewish thoughts from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Segment 6, who or what is the Holy Spirit, Unitarian thoughts versus classical Trinitarian thoughts. Kind of a reminder on what we looked at in paper 2 about Unitarian versus Trinitarian. Segment, paragraph 7, or chapter, if this ends up being a book, who or what is the Holy Spirit, revisiting the Holy Spirit passages from paper 2, which is a repeat of the chart that we just saw a moment ago from Carm, minus the Father and Son columns. It just dealt with the Holy Spirit. And then last, we were ready to turn to this Excursus, which we're going to do next week, which is entitled Ruach within versus Ruach upon. And so, again, let me give my overview. In the BLUF, I just tell you right up front what I believe as a Unitarian, again, in my particular view of the Holy Spirit, which is helpful because when it comes to identifying the Holy Spirit, there's far fewer verses that outline his role and how he is to be identified as a separate person. It's almost by default that we give him the designation of third person of the Trinity. But all throughout the Old Testament, it's very difficult to differentiate between God the Father, who is pure spirit, and the Holy Spirit himself as a third person of the Trinity. We just see this basic broad overlap between the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of God, which is what leads many Unitarians to the conclusion that there is no third person of the Trinity who is separate. The Spirit is simply another way of talking about God. The is there is an is of identity. It's not an is of predication. God the Father is the Holy Spirit. That's what they're trying to say. So we talked about that in my bottom line up front, what I believe the Holy Spirit, or who I believe he is. In paragraph 2, who or what is the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God versus the Spirit of Christ versus the Holy Spirit, I entertain this idea of, again, trying to disambiguate the language of the Bible when we're talking about spirit, right? Because there is purposeful overlap, because the Spirit of God from a predicate perspective, the Spirit is very God, right? The Spirit is God. That's a statement of predication. His class of being, designation, is God. That's like a statement of his character, of his characteristics. When we say a statement of predication, a statement of character traits and things like that, descriptions. But the Holy Spirit is the third person of the Trinity. That's a statement of identity. So we had to kind of try to disambiguate that whole discussion of where we find verses that talk about the Spirit of God versus the Holy Spirit versus God the Spirit versus the Spirit without any other qualifying nouns like God or Jesus or something like that. So we looked at that. It's a very helpful segment in my commentary. We continued moving on through that paragraph 3, who or what is the Holy Spirit, who or what Spirit is indwelling believers. This was a very, again, helpful segment to show us that all three persons dwell within us by the Spirit, because Jesus, as a human being, sits at the right hand of the Father, and he certainly can't simultaneously indwell each and every believer physically, right? That wouldn't work. But he can do it simultaneously by the Spirit, meaning in spirit form. It's the Spirit of Jesus who lives in us, and yet it's the Holy Spirit who lives in us, and yet it's God the Spirit who lives in us as well. That's what I mean by who or what Spirit is indwelling believers, all three. And yet it's not three gods, not three beings, it's one God, three persons, right? Don't lose me. Moving right along, but wrapping things up. You can see this. There were a lot of verses here that we looked at which is where you always want to, at the end of the day, get all of your theology from and all of your final authority from, right? Sola Scriptura and Toto Scriptura. Then we had chapter number 4. If it was a book, the chapter, for now it's just paragraph. Who or what is the Holy Spirit? We had the Filioque debate, which is the split between the Eastern Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church over from whom does the Spirit proceed? Is it from the Father alone, or does he proceed from Father and Son? Eastern Orthodoxy took the view that the Spirit proceeds from the Father alone as the arche, the source. Roman Catholicism took the view that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, and Protestant evangelicalism or Protestant Reformation followed with the same theology that the Catholic Church they inherited from their mother church, Catholicism. And so it's normal for most Protestant evangelicals to also agree with standard Catholic theology that the Holy Spirit proceeds from Father and Son. I do as well. And thus we differ from Eastern Orthodoxy in that regard. But we talked about that in that particular segment. We talked about the Latter-day Saints perspective on the Holy Spirit, how they believe that he's an impersonal force of activity and energy, like the Force in Star Wars or electricity in your wall. Social Trinitarian, we talked about those particular thoughts as well. Go back and read that particular segment. I won't look at it now. But moving right along, this particular paper was a lot longer than the other two. Here we go. Number 5, who or what is the Holy Spirit? Rabbinic Jewish thoughts from the Encyclopedia. We already know that Rabbinic Jews don't believe that Jesus is Christ, that he's not the Messiah. Therefore, they reject Trinity. They're strict monotheists. They are Unitarians in that regard, but they are not biblical Unitarians. They don't believe in Christianity. Biblical Unitarians are, in fact, Christians in that conversational topic. But Rabbinic Jews are not Christians, therefore they reject Trinity. And their view of the Holy Spirit is simply that the Holy Spirit is simply God. It's a statement of identity all over again. The Holy Spirit is another way of saying the Holy One of Israel, who is a spirit. So it's the same way that many popular biblical Unitarians describe God as well. Not the way that Jehovah's Witnesses do. So that was what we looked at in that particular segment. It wasn't very long. You can read about their views in the Encyclopedia Judaica or Jewish Encyclopedia. Segment number 6, who or what is the Holy Spirit? Unitarian thoughts versus classical Trinitarian thoughts, just kind of bringing a summary to those particular views once again in that segment. We looked at Dale Tuggy's views on the Holy Spirit once again. And then as we finally moved a little bit further down, scrolling. Segment number 7, who or what is the Holy Spirit? Revisiting the Holy Spirit passages from paper 2, which is where we kind of dead-ended last week, and which we finished. And then as I jump back up to the final top, so I can jump back down to the very bottom, we're now ready next week to turn to segment 8, which is Excursus, Ruach within versus Ruach upon. What is an Excursus? It's kind of a supplementary material. You don't have to read it, but I hope you stick around and follow along with me. I'm certainly not trying to discourage you from reading along with me. Let me go through this segment. I think it'll be beneficial for us, but it's not heavily apologetic in this nature. It'll have some apologetic features to it. So we're going to talk about Trinitarian versus Unitarian or non-Trinitarian perspectives, but we're also going to talk about this idea of the Holy Spirit coming upon people versus the Holy Spirit indwelling people, and this dichotomy that's kind of set up in common Christian circles that the Holy Spirit was only on people in the Old Testament, but now he's in people in the New Testament, and I'm going to challenge that perspective. But that'll do it for exploring the SHEMA discussions on the issues of Trinity.